Are you tired of spending countless hours building chat applications from scratch? Well, look no further. In this video, I'll show you how you can create a beautiful and functional chat application using React Native and Locofy and integrate it all with Firebase, all in less than a hour. So, in this video, we'll learn how you can convert a simple Figma design to a functional app using Locofy, then generate React Native code using it, and use Gifted Chat, a chat UI library, and finally make it all functional by integrating Firebase to it. Whether you're a complete beginner or an experienced dev, this video is perfect for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Before we start, let me set some context for creating this chat application using the Locofy plugin. The first step in this process is to tag the static design elements found in Figma using the Locofy plugin. This allows us to make the static design functional and interactive. The next step is to ensure that our design is responsive. This means that we need to make it look good on all mobile screen sizes, and then we'll take a look at how responsiveness works in Locofy. Once we've completed those steps, we'll sync our design to Locofy Builder, and over on the Locofy Builder is where we'll create components for our chat application. We'll take a look at how easy it is to create components using the Locofy Auto Component Wizard and also make components manually. And then once we created our components, we'll see how the code looks like and how to export it in the Locofy Builder. The Locofy-generated code will be used to build a chat application along with the gifted chat component and Firebase. Next, we'll fast forward through some editing of the code and we'll add login and chatting functionality so our chat app will be fully functional. This is the step where the real magic happens, as we'll be turning our design into a fully functional chat app, and finally, the end product. We'll get a fully functional chat app where we can click into a chat and send a message. In conclusion, creating a fully functional chat application using the Locofy plugin is a multi-step process. It involves tagging layers, ensuring that our design is responsive, creating components in Locofy Builder, and exporting our code and editing the code to add functionality, and finally, seeing the end product. With this in mind, let's first take a look at an overview of the Locofy plugin in Figma. We have the chat application design, which has been created by an awesome Figma community member, and we'll use this design with some slight modifications. Then Locofy it, and then finally export production-ready React Native code. Now, usually when the designer finishes designing, developers start to develop the application and it may take weeks to complete. But by using Locofy, we bring down the development time from weeks to hours. That's the power of Locofy. Let's have a quick overview of the Locofy UI before we get to start tagging. First, we are going to head on over to the Resources tab and go to Plugins and search for Locofy. Now click on Run. Once the plugin gets loaded, we click on the Select Project bar or click Create New over here and give it a suitable name. Let me give Chat Application for this instance. And then select a framework, which over here is React Native, and click on JavaScript and the Expose CLI and click on Create. Once you've created a new project, you'll see global tags and the other tags widget on the right side. This is important in Locofy because it helps the machines to understand our designs. By tagging design elements, we can make our application interactive and functional. Next, you can preview how the design has been changed to a responsive mobile application. Locofy generates all the code in real time behind the scenes and renders it live on the preview screen. Once you check to see that your preview works as intended, you can click on the View Code button over here and you would be navigated to the Locofy Builder. Alright, so let's jump on to the Locofy tagging part. As you know, tagging in Locofy helps us make a design functional and interactive. First, let's see what happens if you do not tag your designs. Click on a screen, then preview it. And in the preview, You can see the elements are not functional. This is because we have not yet tagged the static elements to functional components. This is the reason we need to tag the designs, which needs to be responsive and interactive. So now that you know why we tag the designs, let's start with an easy one. Let's tag the login button and add an action to it. Let's close the preview, go over and click the login button or the sign up button in this case. So give it a tag of button, and we're good with properties, layout, styling, and let's head on over to the actions tab. So in the actions tab, let's choose a trigger of press and let's add an opacity effect. And in the actions, let's check change page and we'll move on to the contact view page. Right. So let's preview this. Click on the preview button. And once you click on the sign up plugin, you get to see that we move on to the contact view page. Awesome. Now let's go back. Now let's quickly tag the input fields. So click on the text for the input field. Open Locofy. Click on the text for the input field. Give it a tag of text input. And for this, let's choose a variation of React Native. And in the basic properties, check if you're alright with all the inputs. So let me select the placeholder value and give email, right? And just a quick note that if you're tagging for passwords, you may want to check on the secure text entry, right? So that it hides the text and shows the star values like those, right? Now let's move on to layout tab. Looks good. Styling, good. And we don't have any actions for text input, so we might need to skip that, right? So let's preview it. Now let's type the email. Awesome, right? So now we learned how to tag a button and tag an input field. These are the basic things that you would mostly need for every application that you want to build in React Native. Alright, so now you know the basic tags available in Locofy. Now let's move on to more specific tags for building React Native applications. Like for instance, this bottom navigation bar. To tag the bottom navigation bar, click on bottom tabs and select all the bottom tab design that you have in your file. So let me select both of these by holding Shift key and click on proceed. Now let me just quickly swap this so that the contacts with color is actually the active state, and for normal state, let's click on locate and select the normal state over here and click on proceed. And for the chats icon, we have the normal state over here, and let me select the active state. Cool. Awesome. So now let's locate the content which needs to be shown clicking either of these buttons. For the contacts icon, click on locate, click on contact view and done. And for chats icon, we need to go over to the chat view. So let's select the chat view and click done. Awesome. So now let's preview this in action. We need to select the contact view or chat view in this instance so we can see the icons in action. Let me move over to the chats view and we get navigated to the chats view, and let's go over to the contact view by selecting on contacts, and you can see that it works perfectly fine. And also the active state and normal state are accounted over here. So as you can see, it's much simpler and straightforward in Locofy to add navigation to your designs. Alright, so finally, let's tag one last element, and that would be the model pop-up. Now select the model, give it a tag of model, and Now let's tag the other layers which are inside the model, right? For example, the input field and the message button needs to be tagged and made functional before we actually trigger the model itself, right? So let's select the model and click on add other layers and select the input field or the text input and click on proceed. Now Locofy would ask you to tag the design element which you have selected right now. So the selected element is text input over here. So let me just click on text input and I'm okay with all the properties. So I'll click on done and go back to the model and add again. And this time let me select the message button and click on yes proceed. So the message button over here is a button. So let me just click on button, and for actions, let me add an opacity effect. And for actions, let me choose change page and go to the chat room or the chat view. Let's go to the chat view, right? So now we have tagged the model. So now we need a trigger to open up the model pop-up. So let's tag a button, and over here it would be the add button. So click on the add button, give it a tag of button, and for actions, let's select press. Let's give it an opacity effect, and for actions, open model. So over here in the model, we have only one. So click on new chat, and it is important that you click on close when clicking outside of model, because we do not have an exit button inside the model. If you have one, it's well and good. You can actually tag the button to exit out of the model. But since we don't have one, we can close the model when we click outside of the model. So let's review this. Let me select the contact view. If I click on the add button, the model gets open. And we can see that the elements are now functional. And let's close out of the model by clicking outside. So well, that was awesome, right? We finished tagging the designs and now we got an understanding of the Locofy tagging process and the tags available in Locofy. Now finally, let's take a preview of the entire application as a whole after tagging our elements. So click on the first screen, login, and click on preview. Let's move over by clicking on the login button. And over here in the contacts page, let's go to the chats page and then come back to contacts view and maybe select the model pop-up. Awesome. So as you can see, our design, which was before static in Figma, has now been entirely made functional with the help of Locofy and has also been made responsive. Take a look. Awesome, right? So by making the design responsive, the designs can adjust and adapt to different screen sizes. Now, speaking of responsiveness, in order to ensure that your design is responsive and working with Locofy, it is recommended that you utilize the auto layout feature found in Figma. This allows the design to adjust for different screen sizes, and also as a note, what you see in Figma is exactly what you get in Locofy. For instance, take a look at this. You can see that the sign up page is responsive in Figma itself. And when I go back to Locofy, the responsiveness works exactly the same like we found in Figma. Now let me break the responsiveness for a second. Now let me just select the contacts view page and change it to fixed width. Now if I stretch the contacts view page, you can see that it's not responsive. And let me go back to Locofy and show you the responsiveness of the contact view page. You can see that it acts exactly how it acted in Figma. But now if I go back and select fill container and make it responsive back again in Figma itself, you can see that it's responsive in Figma. And while you go back to Locofy, you can see that it's responsive in Locofy also. Great. So once again, note down that what you see in Figma is exactly what you get in Locofy. Awesome. After previewing the application in Locofy, if you're happy with how it turned out to be, you can click on the View Code button and select the frames that you want to export to the Locofy Builder. So click on All Frames and let's select View Code in Builder. Once Locofy syncs the design with the builder, you would be redirected to the Locofy Builder. Welcome to the Locofy Builder. Let me just give you a quick tour of the Locofy Builder. So there are three main things you can do over here. Firstly, you can find the generated code. Additionally, since we are using React Native as our framework, we can easily create components and add props to them within the Locofy Builder. So let's go ahead and add a component now. Let me just select this design over here. Since this is being repeated, let me just make a component and give it the name of contacts card and click on create. Awesome. Now let me select the other designs and click on the existing card that we have already made before. So as you can see, Locofy has figured out that this is a component and we need to add dynamic data to it, and hence props have been added for us. So let me edit those. So the profile name would be profile image. Okay. And the name of the contact would be name. Done. So this is exactly how you create components and add props to it in Locofy Builder. Now with the update of Locofy, there is a new feature in Locofy, which is the auto component wizard with Loco-AI. So let me go with that, and we can see that the Locofy components wizard, with the help of Loco-AI, recommends me components and adds prop to it automatically. Awesome, right? Now since this already exists, let me skip this for now. And the next one, the header container, is been repeated again and again for different uses, right? So let's make this as a component. So let's accept it, and let me review the other recommendations that Locofy Components Wizard has given me. So the sign up page, okay. The login page, okay. And I have my own components too. So I can agree with all three of them. So let me select accept all. Yep, I'm sure that I want to accept all the component recommendations. Awesome. So now you can see that we have made components in just a matter of 5 or 10 minutes. How cool is that, isn't it? So now that we have components and added props to it, let's share this prototype with our teammates. And in order for us to share this prototype, let's click on View Prototype and click on Share, and let's copy this public link and first test it out in our browser. You can see the Locofy design that we just now made is responsive and can be previewed by just a link that you can share with your teammates. Now, you and your team are both happy about the design and the responsiveness that Locofy brought. Let's export this to code so that your team can work on it much more. Click on the export button, and over here let's edit the package name. So let it be com.chatapplication.com. Okay, and the app name, chat application, and app icon, let it be the Locofy default logo. For the starting screen, I want it to be the login screen. And I want to export both the screens and the components. And also, let me select all the screens to export over here. And as an export method, I'm going to download the zip file so that I can open it in my IDE. But if you feel like adding this code directly to your GitHub, you can do so by connecting your GitHub account over here. So with all the export settings done, let me give the confirm export button. Click on done. Now let's view the code in our IDE. Alright, so now I have opened the code that we have just now exported from the Locofy Builder into the code IDE, which is VS Code over here. So let me quickly go over the structure of the file. So we have the assets, which includes the images, the fonts that we exported from the Locofy design. And next we have the components, and the components over here include the components that we exported from the Locofy Builder, the ones that we manually made as components, and the ones that the Locofy auto component wizard has created for us. So components would come in handy for us while developing applications in React Native. So next we have the screens. So all these 5 screens correspond directly to the Figma design file. So as you can see, the sign up page and the sign up page over here, the login page and the code for the login page. And like such, we have the contact, chat view, and the chat room that we have in our design. Then we have the final app.js, which behaves as a root file, combining all the other screens and components into it. You can also see that we have added the bottom navigation bar that we tagged earlier in Locofy. So this would be the structure of the application that we have right now. So next, let's see the design and note down the features that we are going to build for this application. So before we start developing our application, let's go to Firebase and create a project in it. So head on over to console.firebase.google.com and sign in with your Google ID. Then click on Add Project and give your project a name. For my case, let me give React Native Chat App. Then click on Continue. We would not require Google Analytics for this project, so you can disable it. Click on Create Project and wait for a few minutes. Alright, now click on Continue and you would be redirected to the main login page. So over here, go to the left hand side navigation, click on Build, go to Authentication and click on Get Started. So since we require email sign-in to our application, let's go in and enable the email password sign-in method. So click on Enable and save. Now go back to your project and go to Web. Since this is a React Native project, go to Web and give your app a nickname. So Chat App and click on Register App. So once you do this, you will be shown the Firebase script that you need to add to the React Native project. So click on Copy and save it for later. Now continue to console and now let's go over to our IDE and add this config file to our code. Coming back to our code, let's quickly create a firebase.js file into our root folder and paste all the credentials that you just now copied. Now, we don't want to expose these API credentials like this, and we also want to save the constants in a modular way. So for that, let's store it using the expo constants package. Head on over to the terminal and first install .env. Now let's install the expo constants package. npm install expo constants. Alright, so go over to the root folder and create a new file and name it .env. We'll store all the API credentials over in the .env file, so copy it and paste over here and change the name to uppercase variable suitably. Now rename the app.json file to app.config.js. We're converting the JSON file to a JavaScript file. So we need to export this, and so we give export default and also import the .env configuration file. Now let's add an extra object over here. And inside here we can call the credentials from the .env file and save it in the extra object. And similarly, we can add the credentials into the extra object. Save all your files, and then we'll go over to firebase.js and change the exposed credentials to the constants that we just now saved from the app.config file. So let's import the constants first and then call it by using constants.manifest.extra.api key. Similarly, you can add the constants from the expo constants package for all the other credentials. Alright. So now that we have integrated Firebase with our Locofy generated code, we can start building the login and the sign up page using the Firebase functions, and then we'll create a chat room where we'll focus on how you can use the gifted chat component UI library to create chat applications. So first, let's head on over to the sign up page. Firstly, let's build the sign up page. So for the sign up page, let's move on over to the design and check for ourselves what are the components that we need to build. So over here in the sign up page, if you inspect closely, you would see that you need two functional components, which is the input fields and then a button. So on click of that button, sign up, we must register the email ID in the backend, which is entered by the user. So in order to register the email ID, we need to use the special method provided by Firebase called as create user with email and password. We import this method from Firebase Authentication where we pass on the email and the password. This method returns a promise, which is the user credential, and so we must resolve it, and then we use another function from Firebase called as update profile to update the user profile in our code base. So let's start building this. First, let us import the methods from Firebase. So import your user with email and password and update profile, all in camel case, from Firebase auth. Now this won't work because we have not yet installed Firebase. So let's go over to our terminal and npm install Firebase. Alright. So now let's go over and create two use state hooks because we are getting the input from user as email and password. But before we get into the backend logic of it, let's run the Locofy generated code and see in our iOS emulator. So let me go and give npx expose start and open iOS simulator. So there you have it. The Locofy generated code is now viewable in our emulator. So let me quickly go through the Locofy generated code for you. So firstly, we have the image background and then the sign up card component, which is over here, and then the sign up button, and finally the text to ask if we have an account or else to log in. So this is the structure of the sign up page, which is generated by Locofy. And so now let's add the backend logic to this application using Firebase. Let's first add the usestate hook so that when the user enters the email address and the password, we need to store them in a variable. So let's have email and set email as a variable and function for our usestate hook. And since it's a string, let me give it as a string. We'll do the same for the password and save it. Now we need a function to execute when the user clicks on the sign up button. And the function needs to register the user with the passed email and password as arguments inside the create user with email and password function provided by Firebase. So first, let's go over to the onPress function in our touchable opacity button and call an onHandle sign-in. And then we'll initialize the function over here on top. onHandle sign-in. And we check if the email is null or not by using the equality operator and the logical AND operator. If the email and password is not null, we call the create user with email and password method, pass on the auth object, which is mandatory, the email and the password. Now for the auth object, we have to import it from Firebase. So let's go on and import it. Import auth from Firebase. Once you call the create user with email and password method, Firebase returns a user credential promise which we need to resolve. So let's head on over to the documentation that Firebase provided and copy the snippet of code and paste it, and then we'll alter this based on our use case. So once the user has signed in, we need to update the profile of the user. So we'll call update profile. We'll pass on the user as an argument. We also need to navigate to the chat view page, since from our design, once we sign up, we would move up to the chat view page, which we have tagged in Locofy. So let's use the navigation instance that we called earlier. .navigate bottom tabs root and to the screen chat view. Alright, looks good. So coming back to the useState hook, we have not yet defined the set email and set password function. So let's pass on the email, password and the functions to our sign up card page, and then we'll move on to the sign up card page to add these as props. So first, let me give email and pass on the email variable and password as a prop and pass on password variable. And then I'll have the set email props, which would be passed with the set email function. Likewise, set password and the set password useState hook function. Now the sign up page is ready, but then we have to go over to the component sign up card and use these props inside it so that we can seamlessly work between them. Go to components and go up for sign up card. So inside the sign up card, let's add props as our argument, and then for the text input, we'll call the onChangeText function, and let's pass on the set email function and pass on the value. And for the value of the text input, let us pass the email variable which we passed on from the sign up page. So props.email. Now we have another text input which is for password, and so we'll go over there and use the same functions onChangeText and value, paste it over there, and use set password as a function and password as our value. So now we have added logic to our component and we have used the component on a sign up page, and if we run it and refresh in an emulator, we can register our user with Firebase. So next, let's move on to the login page after the sign up page. Going into the login page, we can move on to the design and take a look at it and find that the exact components which was present in the sign up page is present in the login page, like the two input fields and one button with just different functionality. So we would need two input fields and a login button, and the on-click function of the login button, we need to sign in the user with the provided email and password. So for that specific functionality, Firebase has provided with a method called as sign in with email and password. So when the user signs in to our app, we can pass in the email and the password into this method, and it returns a user credential promise which we can resolve and carry out our further actions. So let's implement this into our code. Going over to the login page, we need to first import the auth object from Firebase. So import auth from Firebase, which is present in our root folder, and then we can import the sign in with email and password method from Firebase Authentication. Once that's done, we can add the two use-state hooks like we did in the sign up page for email and password respectively. Since both of them are strings, let's have single quotes inside them to get the input of strings. Now, for the login page, let's move on to the login, and we can see that the Locofy generated code is similar to the Locofy generated code of the sign up page, and so we can change the on press function when pressed on the login button. So let's go over here and call in on handle login function, and we'll define this on handle login function over here. So inside the on handle login function, we'll check if the email is not null and the password is not equal to null. Once we do that, we call in the sign in with email and password method provided by Firebase and pass the auth object, the email, and the password provided by the user. We then resolve the user credential, and by doing so, we navigate to the chat view using the navigation instance. Now, like we added props for the signup component, we need to add props to the login form component so that we can add the functionality over in the components file. So let me go to the signup page, copy the properties that I added for the signup card, and then paste it on over the login form, since both of the properties are same. Now let me go over to the components folder, go over to the login form, and then now let's give the parameter as props, and for the first text input, on change of text, we want the set email function to set the entered value into the email variable. Next, we pass the value as props.email, the variable from the useState hook. This can be replicated for the next text input, which would be the password. But over here, instead of set email, you set password and props.password. Awesome. So now you can save your login form component and your login page and can enter your input. Next, we'll move on to the chat room functionality, where we'll use the gifted chat component UI library to create a basic chat functionality integrating Firebase. Awesome. So now we are going to build the chat functionality for our application. First, let's head on over to our design and let's inspect it. So over here in our design, we can see that we need to implement the chat functionality, and as I said previously, we are going to use the gifted chat component UI library, which is going to give us a chat component which we can integrate with our application and seamlessly make sure that the chat functionality works in our application. So in order for us to use the gifted chat component library, let's go over to our code. Let's install gifted chat first. So npm install React Native gifted chat. Now once gifted chat is downloaded, you can import gifted chat by calling import and then gifted chat inside here. Alright, so once you do this, let's start building the logic of our application. So initially, we need a usestate hook in order to save our messages. So let's have messages as our variable and set messages as the usestate hook function, and then store the messages in an array. Now we have to fetch the already existing chats from Firebase. How do we do that? We have to use the useEffect hook to fetch data from Firebase. So let's use the useEffect hook. And an arrow function. We have to get the chats database from Firebase. Before that, we need to import certain functions and methods that are provided by Firebase and Firestore. So let's import collection from Firebase Firestore. And inside the useEffect hook, let's collect the chats database and store it in a collection reference variable. So const collection database, and the path would be chats. And in order to query the database, we need to use query method, which we can import over here. And then inside the query, we have to pass on the collection reference. So let's pass on the collection reference, and let's sort the chats by the date in which it was created. So order by, which again we need to import from Firebase. And inside order by, let's pass a parameter of created at, so that it returns a sorted chat messages according to the date in which it was created. And since we know that the messages that were sent earlier should be on top, and then the messages that were sent recently should be over here on the bottom. So we are going to sort the chats in descending order such that we get the expected outcome. We then create an unsubscribe function which takes the onSnapshot Firebase method, which we need to import over here, and then the onSnapshot function takes in the query as an argument, and the query snapshot function, which uses the set messages useState function to fetch the data from the Firebase Firestore database and then store it over here in the messages variable by using the set messages useState function. So the onSnapshot method is used to listen to a document where an initial call using the callback creates a document snapshot immediately with the contents of that document, which is the chats database. So the document that we need to take a snapshot of is passed as query. From the returned query, we are going to set it to the messages variable by using the set messages function. So finally, we are going to return the function. This means that when the component unmounts or the effect is rerun with updated dependencies, the returned function would be called and the subscription would be cancelled. So that's it for the unsubscribe function. And since we only require this useState hook to be executed once, let's pass in an empty array. And now let's go to the Locofy generated code and let's comment out all the generated code which we do not require, since we are going to use a simple component library called as gifted chat. Let's import gifted chat over here And inside the gifted chat component library, you can pass in a lot of properties, but over here we are going to use few properties to keep our video simple and understandable. So first property is the messages property, and we'll pass in the messages variable from our useState hook. Secondly, since we are going to build the chat functionality for a chat room, it is better to show the avatar or the profile picture of the user for every message that they send to distinguish between the messages of users. So let's pass in the property show avatar for every message and set it as true, and then we'll use this important property which is onSend function, which we need to specify to let gifted chat component to know what to do with the message that the user has entered currently. So the message that the user has entered right now should be sent to a function which we can declare right now. So let's declare onSend function, and inside the onSend function, let's pass the message as a parameter. And next, the user object should contain the ID which can be obtained from Firestore by using auth, and if it's not null, current user, and then his email. And for the avatar, we can use a website which returns a unique profile picture every time we fetch from it. So now let's define this onSend function over here on the top. So the onSend function can be declared, and since we are passing the message as a parameter, we need the message to be defined here as an argument and as an array, and then we'll use the set messages useState hook function, which will be used to append with the previous messages that we had with the gifted chat UI by using the gifted chat.append method, and append the previous messages which we have in a database with the messages that the current user has entered. And also we need to extract the ID, the created at date, the message content, and the user who has entered the message, so that we can again add the current message the user has entered back to our database. So let's extract each property. So let's extract ID, and then the created at date, the text content or the message, and the user from the message array that has been passed from the gifted chat component. And in order for us to update the collection of chats with the newly added message, let's use the add doc function, which we need to import over here. Add doc, and inside add doc, we have to pass in the original collection, which is the database, and the path, which would be the chats, and the document data that we need to add to the collection, which would be the extracted ID, the created at date, the message content, and the user. So that's it for the onSend function. And so now we are done with the chat room page. Finally, one last thing that we need to implement is providing the authentication of the Firebase to all the screens and the components in our application by updating the root app.js file and by using the context API provided by React. So now let's look into how we can pass on the authentication and the properties to the child elements which are present in other screens in our application. So finally, before diving into the app.js root file, let me explain why we are going to modify the root file. So if you see, we need to pass the authenticated user to all the pages and screens which are present in our application. And the best method to do so is by using the React Create Context API, which creates a context object, and a context in React is a way for components to share state without having to pass it down manually through props. So over here in our code, let's first create a context. So let me call it authenticated user context. Authenticated user context, and use the create context React hook and initialize it with an object user, which is set to an empty string, and a set user property, which is set to an empty function. So by using the context API, we can provide the components the state without having to pass down the props manually. So let's create an authenticated user context provider. So authenticated user provider, which provides the context to the child components. So let us pass the children as an argument. The children over here refers to the child components, which will have access to the context. Let me define a useState hook in which we have the user and a set user function, and initially set it as null. Now we are going to pass these values to the child components by passing down the values by using the authenticated user context provider. And for value I'll pass the user and the set user, which is the variable and the function defined over here in the useState hook. So inside the authenticated user context provider, I'm going to pass in the child components, which is referred as children over here, such that all the child components which are nested inside the authenticated user context would be able to access the state with no issues. So now that we have created the authenticated user context provider, let's wrap the child components with the authenticated user provider component. So let's go down and wrap the child components inside the authenticated user provider. Awesome. So now we are going to go back to the app component, and then I'm going to use the use context hook once again to use the user and set user properties from the authenticated user context. Then I'm going to initialize an authentication listener using the onAuthStateChanged method provided by Firebase. So let me quickly import that. Import onAuthStateChanged from Firebase auth. So let's define a function called unsubscribeAuth, which listens to the changes for the authentication state by using the onAuthStateChanged method provided by Firebase. On authStateChanged method, we need to pass the auth object, which we'll quickly import from Firebase, and then pass an asynchronous callback function that takes the authenticated user object as a parameter. Asynchronous function, let's call it authenticated user, and inside the function, we are going to check if the authenticated user is true, and if it is true, let's set the value of the user inside the user variable from useState hook. If it is null, if it is not true, that is the user has not yet signed in, let's set the user back to null. We'll also quickly create a useState hook, which should be a Boolean type, to check if the authentication is loading or not. So is loading and set loading. The default value would be true. And if the authentication has been checked, we can set the loading to false. Now we'll use this function unsubscribeAuth inside a useRect hook such that the unsubscribeAuth function only runs when the value of the user has changed, and will also return the same function unsubscribeAuth, which is used to unsubscribe from the authentication listener when the component unmounts. Now before we forget, let's import the auth object from Firebase. Alright, so let's have a final preview of the application that we have built right now. Let's start the iOS simulator. And first, let's take a look at the login page. So over here, users can log into their existing account by entering their email and password. But since we have not yet created a new account, let's go to the sign up page and create an account by entering the email and password. So let's give an email and a suitable password and click on sign up. So once the user has successfully logged in or signed up, they will be directed to the chat room. This is a very simple and yet powerful application that we built using Locofy in no time. Before we end this video, let's quickly recap everything we worked on until now. We first began by having an overview of the Locofy plugin and the design we later converted to code. We then moved on to tagging the static design elements using the Locofy plugin. And then we understood why tagging is important in Locofy, and we saw tagging a login button, email input field, button tab, and a model pop-up. We also explained the consequences of not tagging the design. We then covered responsiveness, discussing how to use Figma auto layout, and learned that what we see in Figma is exactly what we get in Locofy. Next, we moved on to Locofy Builder, where we saw how to create components manually, and with the Locofy Auto Component Wizard, we then exported the Locofy-generated code to a local machine and understood the structure of the Locofy-generated code and created a new Firebase project. We saw the integration of Firebase into our applications and how we use the gifted chat component with Locofy-generated code. And finally, we saw the preview of the final app created with chat room functionality. And that's a wrap. Thank you for joining this journey of turning a chat app design into a fully functional chat application with the help of Locofy and Firebase. I hope that this video has been informative and a helpful one for you. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to drop them down in the comment section below, and we always appreciate hearing from our viewers and are open to any suggestions you may have for our future projects. Remember that with Locofy, you can easily bring your designs to life and create amazing projects in no time. So go ahead and start building with Locofy today. Happy building, and I'll see you in the next one.